I have just enabled WPO to work with multiple identity providers, which I have defined in my wp-config file. I have also deleted the configuration from the database, and on the single sign-on page I obfuscated the Azure AD based options. So for me as an administrator, it looks that the configuration is indeed not editable using the WPO 365 configuration pages, but instead it's configured through the configuration that I've defined in wp-config, the file. Let's use the plugin self-test to test the configuration that I've just implemented for multiple identity providers. On the plugin self-test, I can see that I'm now asked to select one of two identity providers. But I can't tell which one is the SAML 2.0 one and which one is the OpenID Connect one. Their friendly names are just not very friendly. And I can change this, and let's do that first. To change that, I will return to my wp-config file. In the file, I can see that for each IDP, there is a title member, and I can change that title. I will change the title for this one to sign in with OpenID Connect. And I will change the title for the first one to sign in with SAML 2.0. I will save my changes, and I don't need to upload my wp-config because I'm working with a local copy of my WordPress website. But in other cases, you obviously would need to send the file back to the hoster. So back to WordPress, back to the plugin self-test. Let's refresh the page and let's see whether I can select now one of two identity providers and actually tell them apart by their friendly name that I see in the drop-down list. Well, that worked. I can sign in with SAML 2.0 and I can sign in with OpenID Connect. Let's sign in with OpenID Connect. I select that identity provider and I click to start the self-test. I'm asked to select one of my accounts, which I do. And I can scroll down and I can see that my OpenID Connect based single sign-on is working as expected. So that's great. I can actually even view the ID token if I wanted to. Let's test the SAML 2.0 identity provider. I click to start the self-test. And in the meantime, I can already see, if I keep an eye on the URL, that this is indeed a SAML request that's now being sent to Azure AD. Again, I select my own account. I can scroll down and I can see that also SAML 2.0 based single sign-on is working as expected. I can even view the response that WPO 365 has received. That's great, it's working as expected. What about other WPO 365 functionality? What about, for example, synchronizing users? Or what about WPO 365 sending WordPress emails using Microsoft Graph? Would that still be working with this configuration in place? No, it would not. Because at this point in time, with this configuration, WPO 365 is simply not able to determine what identity provider information it should take from your wp-config file. But we can change that. Let's go to the wp-config file one more time again. And let's change the default flag for the OpenID Connect based identity provider, and let's set default to true. This basically tells WPO 365 to take this identity provider configuration for use cases when there is no logged in user available. For example, when sending emails or when synchronizing users. Let's save this configuration. Let's return to WordPress admin and let's go to the mail configuration page. At the moment, I'm still unauthorized, but I can click the authorize button, and now I would expect WPO365 to take the mail configuration from the default provider. So basically these 4 lines, use these 4 lines when I click the authorize button. So let's do that. And now I'm authorized. So that's great. There is one last thing worth mentioning about the configuration of multiple identity providers. If you don't want your users to select their identity provider, for example, to avoid errors and them picking the wrong identity provider from the list, you can configure WPO365 to pick an identity provider for them. But they would need to enter at least their email address into a WordPress login form. For that to work, you would need to update the configuration. You would need to add an element, a domains element, to the configuration of an identity provider. Doing so basically tells WPO that this specific identity provider is responsible for handling logins for certain domains. So if I would enter here, for example, the domain WPO365connect.com, and I would add also a domains element to my second identity provider, which is the OpenID Connect one in this case, by the way. And I would configure here the domain WPO365.com for this identity provider. Then I would expect my users to sign in automatically with OpenID Connect if they come from the domain WPO365.com. So I can now save this configuration and I can return to WordPress. And if I would now log out and now try to sign in with, for instance, my email address, which is WPO365.com, I would expect that if I now click to log in, that I'm sent to the OpenID Connect based identity provider to authenticate. Obviously, I haven't modified my login form, so in this case I would need to type in some password, but it's actually not important which one. But if you want to implement a solution like this, you would obviously need to hide the password field, and you would also make the password field not mandatory anymore. So I click login, and I can see from the URL that I am actually not making a SAML request, meaning I am actually now signing in with OpenID Connect. One last thing. If you need to configure an identity provider, for example, because it's the default one, and it uses OpenID Connect, but you don't want your users to be able to select that identity provider from the drop-down list, then you can simply remove the title for that identity provider. So in this case, if I would remove the title for the OpenID Connect based single sign-on provider, I would save my configuration and I would log out from my website, then I would expect this specific identity provider to be no longer available for users to select when they sign in with Microsoft.